Notion recently released the MCP server officially out of beta, which it had been for a few months now. We can connect the Notion MCP server to make and call the available tools to fetch pages, create pages, update pages, and let the MCP server itself perform actions on our behalf without us having to configure the specific API calls. So that's a way to interact programmatically via automations with your Notion workspace without having to write code or set the logic, but rather just providing the context or the query or the action that you want the MCP server to perform, and then it will take care of performing that action in the pages that it has access to in your workspace. We can now connect easily the Notion MCP server in Make and then run these tools from any Make scenario, or also connect them to Make AI agents. This is very early still. I'm still experimenting with it. I think it is worth looking at and seeing what we can do, limitations, and how things look technically speaking, and also practically how it can be useful for you as a founder or a team member or a business owner where you have lots of data in Notion, how you can leverage it to actually be useful for you to retrieve data or take actions on your behalf. As an example, we could use the MCP call using the Notion MCP server as an AI agent tool to search across our workspace or a specific database in our workspace without having to define all the parameters or make multiple API calls. So let's say here we have an MCP client module where we want to search, so perform a search over a specific database or the entire workspace, where we pass a query. This could be dynamic from the AI agent. This is just an example for now. It is static, and I can specify the page URL or the database where I want to search. In my case, I want to search within a specific database. Otherwise, I can not include this one here, and it would search across the entire workspace and all the pages and databases it has access to. And then we get the result like so, the parsed result, where it is an array of multiple items. It is not specified how many. This just depends on the output of the search from the MCP server. And each item is a database item in my case. It could be a page in the workspace, depending on where we are searching for. And you can see it outputs, in this case, the title, the URL of that page, what type it is, and the highlight. This can be taken from the body of a page, from the properties, or a mix of the two, I find. So it is, again, determined by the MCP server, not by me as a user. And then it offers the timestamp when it was created and the ID of that page. And then as an example, what we can do is we can pass all this data into a Make AI tools summarize text module, where we map all the data from the output in Notion, and then we ask it to summarize, or we could use OpenAI to do whatever prompting we want, and maybe pass the result to the AI agent again, and then do all the processing that we need to make. As an example, I'm building an AI agent to develop marketing campaigns and experiments for product sales and marketing for a digital brand. And so this could be part of that agent tool that allows the agent to call the Notion workspace, retrieve all the internal knowledge, which then adds uniqueness to the campaign ideas that the AI agent can output eventually. So if I run it manually, just for testing purposes, then this would run automatically in a more comprehensive workflow and system. You can see it outputs the results. There is the raw results in JSON format, and there is the parsed results. That is an array of multiple items. One page is one item. And then the Make AI tool gets all that data, and then it summarizes like so in this example. So now let's look at all the tools available in the Notion MCP, how to connect it in Make, and other details worth exploring. Notion recently published this article that explains better what's behind the MCP server architecture and the current status of this project and tool. And one interesting thing that I notice here is that they've been developing a Notion flavored markdown that is specifically used by the MCP server tools to make calls and simplify the structure of making those API calls, particularly when it comes to blocks. Because if you've ever used the Notion API, you know how cumbersome it can be to append blocks to a page or retrieve blocks and then work with them. You will need to merge them because each block is a different array, each block has a different data structure. And so programmatically working with those blocks has been quite challenging since the very beginning of the Notion API. So the Notion flavored Markdown is a way to bridge that gap and simplify the process of working with Notion blocks on any page. And this documentation is currently not really public yet, but it is embedded into the MCP server. So the MCP server does use the Notion flavored Markdown. And here are some examples what it looks like to create a callout, block, columns, pages, databases. And as they say in the article, we can ask the AI agent, for example, if you connect the Notion MCP in ChatGPT, which is possible, in Cursor, in Claude, or whatever other LLM tools that allow MCP servers connection, then you can ask to summarize the Notion flavored Markdown specs for you. That's what the writer of this article says in here. Otherwise, it's not really important to know if you use the Notion MCP server, because the LLM will determine the right structure and output the right structure in the tool calls. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, if you go to the official Notion API documentation, there is a section for Notion MCP, and here is where you can find more details about the practical implementation of the Notion MCP server. And importantly, that's where we can find the URL that we can use to connect the Notion MCP in Make or in other tools that support MCP servers. So in Make, we can use the streamable HTTP URL, but there are also other endpoints that we can use to connect the Notion MCP server through SSE, STDIO for a local server, and that's it for now. So you can see here the streamable HTTP URL, mcp.notion.com/mcp. So what we will do is we'll copy this link, and when I go to Make in here, if I type MCP, there is the MCP client module, and I can call tool, that's an action here. And then here I can establish a connection like I would do with any other module in Make. So you can see I already have it here, my Notion MCP connection, but if you are to create a new one from scratch, then you do add, and you can name it Notion, whatever. In my case, it is a test. And then you can select the MCP server. Right now, there are a few predefined ones in Make, and I'm sure that this library will expand over time. You can see there is PayPal, Stripe, Webflow, and many other tools in here that I can just select, and then the authentication is taken care of. But if a tool is not here and they still have a URL that I can use, then I can select new MCP server and I can enter the URL. So in my case, I will enter the Notion URL right here. And then optionally, sometimes tools require an API key or an access token that is usually written in the documentation. In the case of Notion, that is not required right now. So I would just do save, and then Make will manage the authentication process through Auth 2.0. So it just connects to Notion. It lets me select the workspace that I want to use in here. From the drop-down menu, I can select the workspace and then continue. And once that's done, then you will see the Notion MCP connection right here. I'm not going to do it again because I already did it. I'm just going to exit. And then when you use the MCP client module, you can then select your MCP connection. And this will open up all the available tools for that MCP server, which we're going to see in a minute. The second thing that you need to know is that I can also use MCP servers on AI agents. So when I go to the AI agents section, and in here, whenever there is an AI agent, let's say this one here, then there is a new section called MCP, and I can add MCP servers, and the same process as before applies. So I can click on add to establish a new connection, or select one that I already connected from the drop-down menu. And then in here, I can actually select what tools the AI agent will be able to use from this MCP server. So here at the beginning, in the testing phase especially, I like to be a bit conservative, not allowing, for example, page duplications or page creation or updating pages, especially if you're working with real data, which might be not a good idea in the beginning of developing an AI agent that is more action focused and you don't have much control over the steps taken or the actions and their implications by that agent. And then you will have all the MCP tools available here so that you can at any time change them, add new MCP servers, or disconnect existing ones. Now let's take a look at all the tools available in the Notion MCP that we can use via Make or any other similar tool that allows MCP connection with dynamic authentication. For example, NA10 right now doesn't allow that. It doesn't have dynamic authentication to manage Auth 2.0, at least in my tests, and so it is not really possible to connect the Notion MCP directly to NA10 at this time. It probably will be a relatively short amount of time until we can do that as well. In the tool name, I can select what tool I want to use for this specific call in Make. You can see here are all the currently available tools from the Notion MCP server. We can search, and this allows us to search across databases, pages, or the entire workspace, as well as connected sources. Some time ago, I made a video about recent Notion AI updates, and one of those were connectors that allows you to connect different tools to the Notion workspace and then query data also from those tools when asking Notion AI in your workspace, for example. So those connectors are used here as well when searching for data. Fetch retrieves metadata about pages or databases. So we can provide a specific URL or an ID of a database or of a page, and this tool will output all the blocks and metadata about that page or database. We can create pages, so this will allow the Notion MCP server to take action essentially via this call and then create pages in a specific destination. It could be a database, it could be a page where we create a subpage, or we can update a page, properties or content, and we can define this as well. We can move pages. This is something that quite specific to the Notion MCP, and this moves pages from a database to another database or from a page to another page. We can duplicate a page. This is what is a quite specific action of the Notion MCP server. We can create database, update a database, create a comment, get users, get self, meaning the user that connected the MCP server, in this case me, or retrieve a specific user by passing the ID, for example. So let's look at search. When I select search, then there are some arguments that we can pass to determine what to search for. And the only required argument is the query. So what do we want to search for? The query can be a question, it can be a keyword. And here there are more instructions of what to do here. So in here, this can be dynamic. As you can see, I can map it from previous modules in my Make scenario as part of a larger workflow, or I can manually hard code it here. Either ways, this tool, whenever it runs, it gets the latest data from that database or from your entire workspace that you're using here. So that's a good thing. There is no need to adjust anything. You can just keep the query here. We can select the query type if it is internal or user. If we want to search for users, then we need to select users. So it biases the search through that object type. If instead we want to search across all the databases, all the pages in the workspace that the MCP server has access to, then we can leave this empty or just do internal search. The data source URL is a very specific thing that is part of the Notion flavored markdown. There isn't that much documentation about it, really. So I couldn't exactly find how to use it properly, but you can see that it is returned by tools like fetch. And indeed, if you try and do fetch, which is the other tool, and then we provide database ID. I'm going to use one example that I have. Here, I can put the ID of the URL of the database or page to fetch, and then I'm going to save, I'm going to run this module. Now, if we look at the output, as long as the MCP connection has access to it, to that database, then I can see the title, the URL, metadata, type database, and then text, that's the actual result. And the text, I can see database URL, and then all the ancestor path, meaning if this database is nested within pages, then I can see that structure here. You can see, indeed, my resonance calendar database is nested within a page whose title is knowledge. And here is the URL of that page. And that page is nested within other pages, although that's not really true. It is just part of my left sidebar menu in the private section in my Notion workspace. So I'm not exactly sure why there are here two additional layers. And then here is the database's data sources. So you can see here that the data source URL looks like this collection, and then there is what looks like the database ID in here. So that's what we need to use in the search tool if we want to use that parameter or that argument for searching. Otherwise, we can just simply pass the ID of that page without using the data source URL. You can see that the fetch tool also returns the SQL table definition for this data source. So if you go back to the search tool, the final possible argument is the page URL. And this can be the URL or the ID of a page or a database to search with. And that's what I used initially in that demo that I did to query a specific database, in my case, the resonance calendar. I just added the ID of that database in here, and then this tool queried all the pages within that database, including their blocks, so the content of those pages. And that's the most useful thing, really, of the Notion MCP server. We don't need to specify anything or figure out a way to properly navigate the block structure of Notion pages. It just outputs data as needed. When we create page, we can define the pages to create and the parent. The parent is where to create that page, meaning a database or a page. Here we can define the content of the new page using Notion Markdown and the properties. which in this case is not available. Not sure if this is a bug, possibly. Update page, and here we can pass the data required for updating a page here as well using Notion flavored Markdown. We can move pages by passing the new parent. The parent again is the page or database where you want to move that page. And then here is an array of up to 100 page or database IDs to move. For duplicate page, we just need the ID of the page to duplicate. So we can retrieve that via a previous module or hard code it, although we wouldn't hard code it in an automation very likely. Create database. In here you can see properties, which is again not available. Then there is the page ID. Here it could be the page or database, and then type. If it is a page or empty, if it is omitted, then the database will be created as a private page at the workspace level. Title and description. And the properties, it doesn't look like it has any available mapping. I do believe this is a bug, since this is a very new module. This is possible, although I'm not sure. I will need to investigate further why this is the case here. We can also update a database by passing database ID, the title, the description, the properties. Again, this is empty, and then whether the database is inline or if it is in full page. And then in trash, this essentially archives the database, which is then retrievable in Notion from the trash can that is on the bottom left corner of the sidebar menu. We can create comments using rich text. We can retrieve comments from a page because pages can have comment threads, and we can get users. This will query all the members of the workspace. Get self, this will just get my information here because that's the user who connected the Notion MCP server to the workspace. And then I can retrieve a specific user by passing the ID of that user that I can get by getting users, or maybe I'm querying a database and retrieving the assignee of a task. In that case, I could also pass the ID in here from that module. And this concludes all the available tools currently in the Notion MCP server and how you can practically use them in Make to implement automations that use the Notion API without you having to set up much logic besides understanding the whole purpose of your workflow and defining clear actions and steps in the automation. The MCP client can then take actions and structure all the API calls as needed following the Notion MCP server structure and documentation. If you would like to work together, you can contact me via the link below. You will find relevant links in the description of this video. If you have questions, leave a comment. In any case, thanks for watching and see you in the next one.